the document that we've always held hallowed. It's an important and a worrying fact that this document brought together for the first time the African National Congress, the South African Indian Congress, the Congress of Democrats, and the Colored People's Congress. You know, the Freedom Charter is widely acknowledged as the bedrock of our current constitution, another covenant that is being denigrated daily. South Africa's torn social fabric has been many years in the making, with the clouds pregnant with poverty, inequality, and unemployment. It was only a matter of time before the storm clouds would burst, as we have all been witness to over the past fortnight, sadly. The storm brought into sharp contrast the societal divides, where wealthy families were scrambling for bread, milk, and sanitary pads, a daily struggle for the majority of our people. The psychological anguish, intensified by the pandemic, is simultaneously playing itself out with heightened depression, gender-based violence, and suicide. The failure and indifference of the state to read South Africa's lived reality, or act timeously, fueled by bigoted popularism, coupled with inflammatory fake news, made the events that transpired all too predictable. We come here today with eminent community leaders, and in an effort to piece together this torn social fabric and confront the racism and injustice that we faced and will face in coming years. In making these opening remarks on behalf of the board, I'd like to hand over to my co-host, Sandile, who would add her views before we kick off into the panel discussion. Sandile?
Thank you, Narod. Good afternoon. Our society has been rocked to the core by the death, destruction, and division of the past fortnight. The foundations of our democratic system and the unity of our people sits at the edge of a precipice. This dialogue series, hosted by the 1860 Heritage Center, is but one civil society initiative for us to talk to each other rather than past each other, to reach out, to seek out that common ground cherished by the majority of South Africans. At this time of crisis, we, ordinary citizens, must desperately reach out to each other for solutions. This dialogue series might, and I'll stress on the word might, present a platform to lay bare our fears and anxieties, our pain and suffering, our hopes and aspirations for our beloved land, South Africa. Thanks, Nerod.
Thank you for that, Sandile. I think we've set the tone, and could I now introduce our first panelist, my good friend and brother, Mongani Serote, who is the Poet Laureate of South Africa, an activist, former MK commandant, and has worked in exile and in the negotiations with the nationalists to gain our freedom. One aspect of his CV that I'm particularly proud of is that he has the award, the Pablo Neruda Award for poetry bestowed upon him by the government of Chile, amongst others. Can I hand over to you, Comrade Mongani? You need to unmute, Mongani, you need to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Thank you very much. countrymen and countrywomen, I'm raising a point here to say that it is only 3 years ago, when I came to know that there is an institution, a very important institution in our country called the 1860 Heritage Center. I must say, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa about that. Why is that?
How's it, group?
Sorry, I don't know what happened. But also shifting from there, which is a matter that I have to solve. And I'm most thankful that Nirod, when I met Nirod and came to Durban, he did think it important that he and I must go and visit the 1860 Heritage Center. I'm raising this to say, imagine then people who do not have access to traveling, access to reading newspapers, books, and so on, how they have known about this extremely important center, which defines the history of this country. So we should not be surprised that the pandemic stripped us naked in public. It stripped us naked and said, you are so bare, look at yourselves. It is good that that happened. We should not deny it that it happened. What we should be saying to ourselves is, what do we do now as we have gathered here? This is the question that we're asking ourselves. While we're still reeling within the impact of the COVID, the pandemic, here came the past 2 weeks, which were extremely destructive to who we are, starting from Natal, KZN, and coming into Gauteng, utter destruction, imposing a serious regression of what we have achieved. Be that as it may, I still want to say this. We are seated here knowing deep in our hearts that we are a non-racial, non-sexist, democratic people. We stand for that, and there is nothing that is going to shift us from that. It therefore is very important for us to join those who have said, defend our democracy, defend our constitution. It's very important that we take that heritage center, which we should factor. My view is that by now, the 1860 Heritage Center and the Freedom Park in Pretoria should have already worked out a memorandum of agreement to say nobody comes to Freedom Park and does not go to 1860 Heritage Center. Nobody goes to Heritage Center, especially us South Africans, and doesn't go to Freedom Park. Because if we did that, would develop this vocabulary, which we have to shift out of institutions of learning, out of government, and take it to the streets, the back paths in our villages, take it into the streets of townships, take it into the suburbs. In other words, let what the 1860 Heritage Center is saying and what Freedom Park is saying, let these begin to walk the streets of our country. This is our challenge. What is it that we should do so that this history, this culture, this heritage, these values that were fought for so much, begin to be part and parcel of our everyday life. This is what we are faced with, and this is what we have to find. How is it that we do that? if you take the literature of our country, if you take the films of our country, if you take the plastic arts of our country, the sculptor of our country, can we sit here and say, we have made everything possible for all of that to be accessible to our people? No, we haven't. They belong to a certain class of people in the country. And for as long as that is happening, then the elephant in our country stands mightily in the
Sorry, Mongani, you froze there. Are you online?
I'm online now, yes.
Okay, sorry, you were saying the elephant in the country.
The elephant in the country is this. We say we are a non-racial, non-sexist, democratic country which aspires to be prosperous. The last part is the issue that is the elephant in our country. How do we as a people not just put the blame on government, but also say there's certain things which we, all of us who are gathered here, who represent organs of civil society, how do we plan to address?
Sorry, Mongani, you froze again. How do we plan? Okay, in the interest of time, I think Mongani is having connectivity problems. Can I move on to the next speaker? Vilakazi is an author and the executive director of the Valley Trust. And he wrote a very compelling account of what happened when the Valley Trust and its NGO, it's an NGO as many of you will know, and its shop was looted in the past week. I think, the message that you brought out there, that it was not necessarily a race-based looting, and that it was criminality, and it had nothing to do with race. Because even when an NGO that uplifts the community around it in the beautiful 1,000 Hills of KwaZulu-Natal, that it's not just a race-based thing. Would you like to elaborate on what you posted, Spoo?
Thank you very much. I will do that. Firstly, just to convey my gratitude to the 1860 Heritage Center for inviting me to this discussion, and to state just what a privilege it is to share stage with the esteemed panelists today. The letter, I've been surprised. My colleagues and I have been surprised by how it's been received, and by how widely it's been received, how widely it's been shared. It's been shared by hundreds of people across the country, even abroad, by friends. Because for me personally, writing it, it was more of a rant, and more of just wanting to vent this frustration that I and my colleagues were feeling about what had happened. And the frustrating thing about the situation is that it is wrong at so many levels. When I say this thing, I mean the looting and all that. What I would say by introduction maybe is just state 4 things that have stood out for me about coming out of this time that we've just been through. So the first thing has been the extent to which the ANC is willing to go to settle factional differences. They are literally prepared to burn the country to ashes just to fight factional wars. There was this whole excuse that the president couldn't take action, couldn't release the army earlier because of echoes of Marikana, etc., that would give one party the upper hand over him. But that's his problem. We are not concerned about about him saving face personally. We are concerned about what does he do to save the people of South Africa. So for 3-4 days, we just watched helplessly as the country burned. So the one thing for me that was just so difficult to grasp and wrap my mind around was that the extent to which our leadership can carelessly set us against each other as well as destroy the country. The second thing then was what is encapsulated in the letter. Just in the midst of that, I did not expect, it's happened before, we have these riots within communities and xenophobic violence in which assets within the community are destroyed. But I've never seen it to this extent, where the local economy was totally decimated by the locals themselves. And now, a few days later, people can't even get electricity vouchers to light their homes because there isn't a place to get them. They now have to pay the price of a taxi fare to go into the suburban areas to meet their basic needs. So that's been a frustration to me. And the looting took place over days. I would have, you might excuse it, or you might understand it if it's in a flash of the moment and people act unreasonably. But when over days, people continue to do this, to eat themselves from the inside, that is mind-boggling. The third thing that was significant to me about this period was this coming together then, that saw communities take up the responsibility to protect each other and to protect themselves and to protect their businesses in the face of a refusal to act by the government and by the police forces. And I think what it's done is it has shown in very much the 1995 the Rugby World Cup fashion that actually we can stand together. And when we stand together, we are formidable as a nation. So that's been one of the positives that's come out of this. And I would be highly embarrassed to be in President Ramaphosa's shoes, as was expressed in this other open letter to him that's been doing the rounds, because this happened absolutely without any help from him. In fact, in spite of the lack of help from him, people still came together and were able to do something meaningful. And then the last thing, I have to agree wholeheartedly with the previous speaker, Dr. Serote, when he says there is a white elephant in the room. There is an elephant in the room. And it's been bothering me. It's one of the things that have bothered me the most. So recently there was a post from Indian television that did the rounds on WhatsApp. And so the interviewer is interviewing a South African contact on what's happening in the Phoenix area, etc. So the lady proceeds to say, the majority of the businesses here are owned by people of Indian origin. And so there's this whole thing. And so it goes, and so it goes. But that's kind of mentioned as if it's just a footnote. Then there was a letter circulating, purported to have been written by Clem Santa, where he is talking about how big business and foreign investment is being affected. South Africa already has this high inequality, so we can't afford. Again, the inequality is just mentioned as a footnote and as a by the way, when leading on to other issues. But actually, in my view, the inequality is the core issue. It is the main issue. If we keep glossing around it and doing all these dances around it, we are doomed to keep coming back to these times of strife. So until and unless as a country, we really stand up and take serious cognizance of the fact that this is unnatural, first of all, and secondly, that it's unsustainable, we will keep perpetuating these cycles of violence. So let me stop there for now. I'm so happy to be here this afternoon.
Thank you so much for that valuable input, Spo. I really appreciate it, and thank you for keeping the time. I must ask also, whilst I have the floor, for any of our online participants to pose questions to the group on our social media platforms and on this platform. And in so doing, may I welcome a dear friend of mine, Linda Zama, who I know from the late 80s when she was a lawyer in the CBD and worked in the anti-apartheid movement and in the UDF. And what a pleasure, because now I only see her on Facebook. So it's wonderful to have you here, Comrade Linda. And can I hand over the floor to you now?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the privilege, actually, of being part of this very, very important conversation, and thanks for the kind words. Although this is a very difficult time, I know some of you are going to be surprised when I say what has happened is very simple for me, because the chickens have come home to roost. I am now in the public service from 2015. When I was headhunted and I joined government, the first thing that struck me was the lack of capacity, lack of vision, and just not understanding what was playing out when the province was plagued by the so-called service delivery protests. I didn't understand what was going on because I had been away from KwaZulu-Natal for 12 years. It became clear that there were signs of discontent. It was startling that people would be demanding to meet politicians, alleging that officials have been informed about their challenges, lack of water. You would have Abahlali saying we've been marching from 5 years ago, etc., and nothing happens. Then, what was also troubling, it was to see the development from marches, peaceful marches, where memoranda handed over, and then people became agitated. They started to be unruly. From unruliness, we then saw properties being destroyed. For instance, the University of UKZN, the law library was destroyed, cars were torched. So we've been seeing these things. And to me, I couldn't understand how my country would not read what people were saying, because I was getting the message that people out there are then saying, we are not being listened. We only get to be listened when we start to destroy. That was the message I was getting. Having said that, my legal background, I still remember in 1986 when the late Oliver Tambo gave us an assignment to do research on principles for a democratic South Africa. We did sterling work. We took our research, simplified it, and took it to all corners of the country, because the instruction was that as far as the Constitution is concerned, the principles must talk to people. The principles must talk to people's lives. I must say, it's been very disappointing that anything that has to do with the rule of law now is being poo-pooed. People are now associating the Constitution with an individual. And that's dangerous. I'm saying it is dangerous because when all is gone. Where are we going to hide when this document, the Constitution was not supposed to be an ANC constitution. It is a constitution for our country, which explains why it was heartwarming that civilians protected their properties, those who could. They defended their communities. This was done by civilians. It wasn't any political organization. And I am now decoding that South Africans are saying South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. And we need to zoom into that. I'm glad Comrade Wally Serote is here because we were tasked with, by the late Oliver Tambo again, we were working, putting together Arts South Africa because we also wanted the arts to be democratic. We wanted the arts to talk to communities wherever they are. However, the truth of the matter is that all of us, and I would like us to take responsibility that we dropped the ball. Somehow, we have been gripped by a sense of false security, whereas the rumblings have been out there. As far as the Phoenix matter is concerned, it is very, very important that we remember that that area has been in what I call fragile peace. I looked at, for instance, Phoenix, Reservoir Hills, the informal settlements there. And for me, that was a tinderbox because we had communities where the disparity is so palpable, the inequality, the poverty, etc. So it only required one mischievous person to light that fire and blow the whole thing. As I draw my remarks to the close, I'm going to go back to the rule of law. I'm going to go back to the Constitution. Let us use our Constitution. Let us simplify it. Let us go back and unpack it and get people on board, because that is a forest where we are going to hide when all is lost, in order for this country, like a phoenix, to rise from the ashes, because right now we are in a very difficult situation. Again, thank you very much for the opportunity to share my views. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Linda. That was very, very insightful, and I think echoed what Mongani was saying about the Constitution, and we really appreciate you making the time. Next on our agenda is Bishop Rubin Phillip, another long-standing friend of mine, also comes out of the Black Consciousness movement like Comrade Serote, and has been doing yeoman work in terms of social cohesion. And I think this must be a sad day for you, Bishop Phillip, with all your work and all your efforts seemingly coming to test in the past fortnight. So perhaps you could give us some insights from your side. You need to unmute, please. Sorry. Sorry, you're not unmuted yet, Bishop Phillip. Perhaps I could move on the program and then just come back to you, Bishop Philip. Is that okay? Next up, then we have Comrade Don Gumede, the son of the very famous first president of the United Democratic Front, Comrade Archie Gumede, who will share his views now on what has transpired. I think the ideals that his father worked for at the UDF and in other structures has also come under test today. So, Comrade Don, are you online? Can we hear your views?
Thank you very much. Hello?
Hello.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation to this very important engagement at this time in the life of our democracy. As the roots of our democracy are shaken and our hopes as a nation are beginning to be dashed, we believe that more engagement is necessary. But before we look at the proposals and solutions, I think that it is important to have a few observations. The first observation with regards to the social media is that these days, every court judgment of any political significance has a counter narrative of some sorts in the social media that seeks to discredit either the judiciary or the government and the society we aspire to be. The second observation is that for every visit to a site of whatever has happened, we find that different observers come with different narratives after observing the same event. And the social media is responsible for carrying different narratives so as to propagate messages that are suitable for whatever their objectives or selfish objectives are. Thirdly, I think one of our basic principles is to have freedom of expression. But that is qualified, and that has some assumptions. We assumed that there would be truthfulness, there would be objectivity, or there would be honesty in whatever we reported when we fought for the freedom of expression. But what we see now is that there are some people that are transmitting messages that are promoting hatred, that are promoting individuals that are not true and that have not been verified with or researched with any reliable source. And we have to go back and demand for ethical or for ethics in the space of social media, or then they need to be regulated. Coming to the issue of perhaps solutions, I think we've got as a starter to have people with the same minds coming together and conferring towards solutions. Secondly, we've got to agree that we are building a future in line with our constitution. Thirdly, I think it is best
Sorry, Don, I think we've lost you there for a bit.
It creates a lot of heat and deprives us. Other area. Hello? Oh,
Hello, yeah, now we can hear you clearly.
yes. And my observation was also that communities that have structures that are intact could be, were in a position to defend themselves, whereas communities without any structures found themselves very vulnerable, especially given that the the expected security was not there in time. And my proposal, given all the above, is that we need a non-governmental organization of activists for purposes of advocacy towards renewal and rebuilding. Given that our right to the freedom of expression is abused as a right to lie, a right to deceive, a right to mislead. For purposes of correcting that, I think we need to be in constant communication towards rectifying that firstly, and secondly, building the South Africa of our dreams that is in line with the constitution that we all adopted. I think it's better to conclude there now. Perhaps
Yes.
I can respond later.
Thank you very much, Comrade Don. I think it kind of leads on from what Comrade Linda said earlier, that it was the communities that had to defend themselves in the absence of any sort of state protection, and that your call for a community-based group of activists and to develop that narrative that builds this cohesion, I think it follows on. But a person who's got much more experience in this field, Bishop Rubin Phillip, I see you now unmuted, so perhaps we can hear your input now. So over to you.
Hi. Thank you very much. It's good to be with you all. I'll be brief. The first thing I want to say is that one of the real and fundamental problems we're facing in the country, and indeed here in the province, is a lack of firm, visionary, honest leadership. I think it all starts there. And it's a difficult thing to say, but unless we have leaders, and I'm not singling any one person, but unless we have leaders who are really committed to matters of justice and peace and the citizens of this province, I don't believe we're going to get anywhere. And related to that is the whole question of the youth and unemployment. I gather the unemployment among the youth is as high as it's over 77%, just over. It's around 77%. Well, you're not going to have a winning nation. You're not going to have a winning community when you have that kind of statistic. And that's bound to lead to all sorts of problems and difficulties, to put it nicely. I think the third major problem we face and has contributed to the violence and bloodshed and fracture that we've seen in the last week or two is the kind of dysfunctional leadership at the local level. I think it's very easy to have a go at those who are in national and provincial leader, but you know, some of our ward councillors are just pure thugs. You know, they don't give the kind of leadership that they ought to be giving at that local level. And I've heard umpteen stories of how some of these ward councillors have taken sides based on race. We can't have that. And that needs to be looked into. So a lot of that is about leadership. It is about, you know, the economy, and in particular, taking care of our youth, ensuring that they get jobs, and so on. I think if I can just conclude, we very often in a crisis like to say things that sound very optimistic and sugar-coated and all of that. I think we need to be careful about this uncritical optimism, because we can point to many instances when we as a country has been in a very deep hole. We face some major problems, and we tend to gloss over it and not deal with some of the root causes. And I think the time has come for some real honest, sober reflection. Otherwise, I fear this is not the last time that we've seen this horrendous situation that's really divided our community, that's caused untold fear. And along with that, I think it's going to take a bit of time to bring about the kind of healing that we've sought. Surely it's not impossible, but it depends on the kind of leaders we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that valuable input, Bishop Philip. In saying that, can I hand over to you, Sandile? I think you would
yes, sure.
Salma, and take it from here.
Yes, thank you, Bishop. In fact, one of the points that you had raised regarding the uncritical optimism that we have, I think is something that we need to explore in our discussion later on. For now, I'm going to hand us over to Salma Patel, who is the executive producer of news at SABC. And I hope Salma is going to shed some light on or pick up from what Ntate Gumede had said in respect of freedom of expression and looking at that from the angle of fake news. Salma?
Thank you very much, Sandile. It is indeed an honor to be part of this brilliant panel made up of all my heroes. So I'm really, really honored to be part of this. It just so happens that today we held a talk show on the same vein, which was, you know, talking about racism, ethnicity, inequality, and for me, fake news. That was one of the issues, and actually added to the narrative and fanned the flames of racism. I mean, as we heard that it was basically a tinderbox, fresh. It was like this piece that was almost It was there, but it was so like delicate that it took maybe one social media post or one outlook or somebody's opinion, and this entire thing sparked into, fan the flames of social, um, well, race hate on social media. Unfortunately, like Uba Gumede has said, and we had heard from Bishop Rubin Phillip as well, one of my superheroes, um, that there was a lack of leadership on the ground. We even had the police minister Bheki Cele admitting to us that, they had taken too long a time to respond to this violence and this looting and whatever else was going on. One of the interesting facts that did come out is when we had so many social media users tagging, for example, Joe Biden, the American president, and tagging the Indian government, asking for the Indian army to be brought in. This actually fanned the flames across the ocean and overseas, and made people overseas ask the question, is there really some sort of anarchy going on in South Africa? Is it a genocide? From my experience, and what now that we are sitting down and looking back, it's the language that we chose that actually also added to the narrative that could have fanned the flames as well. Being an editor and being an executive producer of news, current affairs on radio, it has been very difficult to sift through what is real and what is fake. The voice notes that we were getting, the utter panic, the sheer realization that, what, my government will not protect me. That feeling is still there. And that feeling is still on the ground. I mean, we still had people coming onto the talk shows this afternoon telling us that, for example, Phoenix was not the main source of all the terror and the massacre that was happening. There were other areas like Mongani and Overport that had also gone through similar situations like this, but because of their private security companies and their patrollers who are on the ground, they managed to quell those, those uprisings or the whatever happened immediately. Yesterday, the SAPS actually came out giving us a press release saying, what, they have found 2 incidents of fake news. There were people that were arrested for incitement, and they are going to be charged. So they're actually going to be taken to court on Monday for inciting violence and race hate as well. Where does race hate stop? Where does unity start? It all starts with me. I had a little schoolgirl, a teenager, who actually schooled me and said, no, it's not about race hate. It's about criminals versus the good people. It's about the good versus the bad. It's about those criminal elements that wanted to steal, that wanted to come in and cause all these issues and all these problems. That's where we stand right now. And for my opening statement, I'd like to say that, what, our country needs to learn how to use and decipher what is fake news and what is real. A simple voice note or a video going around with someone saying, hi guys, is not something to look out, and is not something that is credible. You also need to look at the voice note or the video itself, the little gray writing on the top, the arrows, the number of arrows that it has, that it says forwarded many times. It actually means that that video or that voice note is not from the original source. You need to go back and ask the original source. So I'm glad we're having this conversation. And I'm so glad we are speaking to people who have been in the struggle, who have been through a lot. Because now it is up to people like us to rebuild South Africa and build a better future for us, not to go out to international media and cause all these diplomatic tensions that have arisen from this particular incident. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Salma. That was very insightful, coming as it does from a journalist on the ground. Moving along, we now have the MEC for Economic Development, Tourism and Environmental Affairs, Comrade Ravi Pillay, an activist in his own right from the South Coast, and has worked in the ranks of the NIC and the ANC for many, many years. I think you've got a lot of challenges, both in your professional capacity and then in your struggle capacity as a member of the rank and file of the ANC. Would you share with us some of these challenges, both on the professional front and on the personal front?
No, thank you, Nirod. Let me start by just getting an indicator that my bandwidth is low. So if I will try to switch the video off if that recurs. But let me recognize you guys, the moderators, distinguished panelists, comrades and friends. I must start with expressions of solidarity and condolences to all those who have lost loved ones, been injured, or lost much of their, if not entire, lifelong work. I think it's important to say that we feel the pain and that we will never be able to say this often enough, but that the only way to meaningfully mark that solidarity is, as is being expressed here today, to be completely frank in our assessment and struggle to entrench what I call a fact and truth-based approach to the multiple challenges we are confronted with. It's a little bit more than the fake news of social media. You see some of the narratives coming, it's said with almost conviction when it's so obviously false in some of the bigger political narratives that we have. So facts and truth, however painful it may be, sometimes must be our central goal. And this first message must be, as has been said, that the rule of law must visibly find expression every time it is broken without fear of favor. So we must therefore welcome arrests of those alleged perpetrators of violence and killings, and those responsible for instigating and coordinating destabilization of our country, although there is much more work to be outstanding there. Now, many have correctly characterized the events of the past 2 weeks as having the following elements. As you yourselves have said, the fundamental triple challenges of poverty, unemployment, and inequality, providing an all-pervasive fertile ground for those with ignoble intentions. And now it must spur all of us with noble intentions to make this the centerpiece of our future endeavors. Almost 1.5 years of COVID-19 with consequent lockdown, regulations, and limitations on economic activity have further aggravated the impact of the poor. As much as it hasn't been said yet, again, whatever your view of it may be, the incarceration of former President Zuma was a trigger for a protest that was immediately overtaken by looting and brazen criminality. And I was in the position to observe very close up at times. And yes, there were the masses of the poor, the old go-go, the young child. There were the not so poor, the opportunistic ones who came with cars. Then there was the significant evidence of organized crime, participating in a clearly premeditated basis. And finally, and critically, there was what I call the diabolical orchestration and instigation by forces which are as yet not completely unmarked, but the investigative work is significantly underway. From the professional side, as you put it, Nero, the damage has been significant. I think 50 billion is just a very, very conservative estimate. But the bigger damage is to confidence, to the South African soul. And I think that's what we're trying to deal with here today. Again, from a professional level, 58% was in Durban, 17% in Maritzburg, and the smaller percentages throughout the rest of the province, but not insignificant. For a town like Richmond, which is probably represents 0.5% of the damage, but of those 18 shops that supplied food, only 2 were left standing. Now, you don't need to be a maths professor to consider the implications of that. But we must also take great hope from our ability to withstand and resist, as has been said. Much has been said already about the performance or non-performance of the security apparatus. But I think after that lag, and we'll analyze it at the appropriate time, we're able to coordinate a response that opened the N3 and N2, which was critical, reinstate the supply of fuel, and most importantly, supply lines of food which is still a work in progress. But that must not be underestimated from a strategic point of view, because we are not able to do that, and it may well have been the intentions of those responsible. We would have been sitting here with a problem 100 times bigger than what we have. So this was only possible because what I call a very intensive national patriotic effort by a number of stakeholders to pull together to make that happen, and that needs to be sustained. Now, time allocated does not allow for a proper discussion of many issues, and you've been very strict in your time allocation. So very briefly, the weakness in the state is an issue. I think Linda, and I work with Linda, she's spoken eloquently about that. And as much as it's a serious challenge, I've got some glimmer of hope about that. So building the capable ethical state where accountability is the key must be our mantra, and hold people to account. So economic policy and economic transformation in particular, let me say that again, whether you call it economic transformation or radical economic transformation, I think we've lost the plot there in a bit of the way things have been polarized. And I'm saying that if you talk equality, if you talk inequality, then central to that is the economic transformation agenda. And we must not allow it to be vulgarized by either extreme. And in this regards, there are many programs that we need to roll out, but it will also need massive support from national government, and that then goes to the macro economic policy debate. Increasingly, we are saying, and I hope that this is one of the things that can come out, and we're quoting a former Chinese president who said, "It does not matter whether the cat is black or white, as long as it can catch mice." Let me repeat that. It does not matter whether the cat is black or white, as long as it can catch mice. So let's think through, but let's be practical. What works? What works in a bottom-up approach is what we would argue for. So recovery and rebuilding will only succeed, and this is a key issue, I think, for this discourse, if it is on a firm foundation of social cohesion and nation building. But this time around, let's ensure it's sustained and premised on a genuine and effective programs. And all of us really have to dedicate our time for practical programs. And each of us will have to say, what is my contribution to this task, where there's space for ventilation, as we are doing now, space for accountability, and ultimately healing. I refuse to be stereotyped. I don't think the community of Phoenix should be stereotyped. Yes, there will be those 5% in every community that would be racist, that would be obnoxious, that would be irrational. And the law must take its course for those who did what they did. But there's also good stories. Again, in Kokstad, not a single building was damaged. A united force led by the mayor got organized and defended their town. Lastly, or second lastly, let me just say that the social media debate has to be lifted. Not only in the way Salma has done, but also to go to the what you call these guys, the technology companies, whether it's the Googles of the world and the Facebooks of the world. They have to introduce controls. We have to engage them. And if it's not controls that amounts to media restriction, at least they have to be a big part of tracking those responsible. Because sometimes our own capacity is not going to be enough to be able to do that. Let me just conclude with a story of Edendale. I went to Edendale as part of my work. And the Edendale shopping center in a township, in a semi-peri-urban rural area, was completely gutted. 2,200 jobs in an area that's already deprived. And I want to just tell you the story of one young man, Sphelele Vazi. He started off as a vendor outside the mall. He's now 36 years of age. 10 years later, he had built up where he was running 3 shops, employing 60 people. Of course, all gone. And when I spoke to him, I asked, "So what are you doing now?" And he said, although he cried, he ended up saying, "Look, my spirit will never be broken. I went and bought a van load of bread, and I'm selling bread now to begin again. And that, in many ways, is what we too will have to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Comrade Ravi, for that input. And thank you very much also for making yourself available, because I think it's a valid criticism that perhaps was touched on by Bishop Philip, that a lot of the ANC deployees or the ANC councillors and MECs have gone to ground, or if they have not gone to ground, then they're embarking on their own looting. So thank you for coming along and sharing with us, and I would encourage you to speak to your colleagues in legislature, to come across and speak to the people and to be accountable as you have been. And I would encourage you to take that message back to the Premier's office and the legislature. In that, I'd like to hand back to you, Sandile, and you can take it from here.
Thank you, Nirod, and thank you, MEC Pillay. I'm particularly interested in hearing from you later on economic policies that you touched on. Our next speaker is Michelle Tryon. She's a minister of religion and community activist. Michelle, you've heard the MEC speak about the restoring confidence in the South African soul. Perhaps from that perspective, you could just enlighten us.
Okay, good
Michelle?
afternoon. Thank you. Good afternoon to the panelists. I'm so honored and blessed to be here, and I want to thank the 1860 Heritage Centre for inviting me and just allowing me to participate on this panel. And I also want to just greet everyone that is joining us via Facebook and YouTube. I want to thank you for just being a part of this conversation and dialogue that we are having right now. Mine is to share just some of my reflections on what has happened, that I think for the most part, most of us felt like we were in a dream or in a nightmare, or it just seemed so unreal, everything that was happening not so many days ago. A lot has been said. I just want to maybe highlight a few areas that maybe that are close to my heart as a minister of religion. And maybe in the aftermath of the looting and all of that, the thing that stood out to me is how the religious sector across the board just came in all shapes and sizes and in all colors, and began to take care of us as the people of these different provinces that were so badly affected, KZN and Gauteng. And that was something that really touched me in my reflections and observations, because I guess something that has really been, I don't know, I want to use the word irritating to my soul. It has maybe hurt my soul to see that here in South Africa, we are a religious country. And during COVID and all of that, we were told that our religious sector were not defined as essential. And that has been something that has really just kind of ripped me apart, to be honest. And the thing that I witnessed and the thing that touched me so deeply was to see the various religious groups just coming together and just religious leadership just coming to the fore when we were at our lowest, I guess, and just mobilizing and getting food parcels to people and getting aid to people. I think we as a country have gone through a trauma here, because I don't think we've ever experienced something like this. We felt that our government, our security forces, our intelligence agencies were not able to be there for us the way we wanted. And it was the religious sector that really came to the fore and calmed the trauma that we have experienced and we're still going to have to deal with. And for me, I'm trusting that this highlights the issue in our country, that we need to ensure that our religious sector is at the forefront of all of these dialogues, all of these solution vehicles that will help our society. And I'm really trusting, I'm believing, I'm praying, I'm hoping that the religious sector would be given an opportunity to be defined as essential, and we would begin to rebuild our souls as a nation, because we've been through a major, major trauma. So that has been phenomenal and outstanding for me, and I'm trusting that we can use what we've seen as a catalyst to make sure that the voice and the heartbeat of the religious sector doesn't get dimmed here in South Africa. The other thing that stood out for me was the power of civil society, and be it in the form of just our communities, protecting, caring, being there. It has really been touching. And I think that we are going back to basics, where it's about me and you as civil society. And I think that we've given a lot of power to our politics and our political leadership and the political arm of society, and kind of just like looked at them that they are the answers to all our problems. And I think that what we have been through show that civil society is still extremely powerful. And I am believing that we will not lose what we have seen here, where civil society, whether it be at the roadblocks or just at shopping malls or shopping centers, where we saw civil society across the racial lines. You know, I also just don't like that we still divide ourselves in terms of race, but be that as it may. But as human beings, we came together in all colors. And I am praying, I'm hoping that the CPFs of the world, the community leaders of the world will rise to the occasion and not just come up when there's a catastrophe or when there's trauma or when there's something like this, but that we will begin to understand the power we have as civil society, as a me and a you and a we. And I'm praying that we would be able to use that power in a more focused way, in a more impacting way, effective way, and we don't lose the momentum of what we saw the last few days. It was absolutely amazing to see how both men and women, the racial groups, young, old, you know, all the things that seek to divide us by definition actually were the things that brought us together, and we came up with solutions to protect the spaces that we could, to support the places that we could. And I am praying and I'm hoping that we will build a momentum, and I am hoping that every person will join a civil action organization and participate at grassroots levels. And if we could have made a change, and if we could have impacted the way we did in these last few days, I am hoping that we will continue to understand our power. Don't underestimate our power. Don't overestimate politics. But the power of love, the power of generosity, the power of caring, the power to be there for one another. I think that the one thing that actually brought me to tears was on one of the community groups, there was a mom who came on, and she didn't have formula for her baby. And my heart just went out. I don't know if it's the female part of me or what it was, but that mother, although that woman she had food in her house, but she didn't have formula for the baby. And she reached out into the community and she said, I need formula. And this is, whether you're rich or whether you're poor, the community came together. We all were without something. And the community just came together and how they helped one another and bring formula or whatever. We had bartering groups that were formed. If I had bread and you had milk, in the community we shared it. And when I look at the inequalities and the poverty, and I think that If evil can tap on a fragile area such as what we have, I'm praying that good and light, we will use this, because it is the communities, whether rich or poor, male or female, whether different race, different religion, they came together and they helped one another. And I think we've got to, as a community, as civil society, begin to understand, if I'm rich, I cannot walk past my poor brother or my poor sister. I've got to be able to understand that I am responsible in this thing. I am accountable. I do have a part to play. And we as civil society, we within our communities must start caring for one another and sharing what we have. And if we can drive these sorts of things, I think the soul of our nation will change. And we're not only looking at ourselves from a political point of view, but just as a human being. How can I drive past my brother and my sister that has not, without participating in helping them? And I think when we talk about unemployment levels,
thank you, Michelle. I think you made that point already.
Okay. Right.
You know, that we need to be our brother's keeper.
100%.
And I think one of the things that this crisis has taught us is that we've all come to the party to be our brother's keeper and to ensure that the community is safe. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for that. Sandile, you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you so much, Michelle. Next in line, we have Sihle Mkhonza. Sihle, you've heard Michelle speak about the major trauma that some of us have experienced during this time. Selvin had shared with me a Facebook post where you had shared some of that trauma. Perhaps you can talk to us about that.
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for having me here. Yeah, I think there's a bit of a somber mood. It feels like 2 weeks and it's after the funeral, and yet we're still directionless. But firstly, I'd just like to pay my tribute and respect to the families that lost their loved ones, and those that lost their livelihoods as well during this riots. What's been revealing and prevalent is the microaggressions and the racial profiling, particularly by white and Indian citizens to Black citizens. To be pulled over and asked invasive questions, searching card, dispossessing them of goods is a crime, particularly if they are propagated with racial undertones. Yes, we've mentioned community forums, but how effective have they been? Over the last few weeks, we've seen them come together in crime in a conceited and premeditated way, where multiple laws were broken. The Disaster Management Act, how many of those citizens were out after curfew? The Firearms Control Act saw guns that are much older than I am, guns that are certainly not to be used for or as a form of protection or self-defense, rather. We saw the gang activities, the Poker Act, that was also defied, municipal bylaws, the blockading of roads, and certainly the Constitution, the rights of movement. One of the panelists did mention that it was the good versus the bad, but no, that's not the case. It was actually the bad versus the worst. Hundreds of people were slaughtered and thrown in the bush like they were animals. Communities came together in crime. They motivated the violence. They concealed evidence, and that's aiding and abetting. And it just got me thinking that the soldiers might be raiding the lesser criminals, and that is probably the foundation for systemic and institutional racism, which bears the fruits of poor people being killed and oppressed, while the rich are taken to court and to commissions of inquiry. And as Black people, we might have ourselves to blame. because it is imperative for us to scrutinize every single relationship that we have with the other race groups, which is sad to say, but like, are we in a marriage? Are we cohabitating? Is it a fling? Is it a one-night stand? What is the nature of this relationship, and what does it require? One of the panelists did mention that we lack leadership, which is definitely the case. We're here to pull no punches, and many terms have been used, like there's an elephant in the country, chickens have come home to roost, and sober reflections. We had inflammatory statements from the president himself talking about ethnic mobilization. The traditional prime minister of the Zulu nation, Prince Buthelezi, condoning lethal attacks against Black people. My question is, where were some of the esteemed Indian community members, such as the MEC himself, Ravi Pillay, who spoke about he doesn't want to be stereotyped? Where was the Vivian Reddy's? Where was Naren Singh? People that are welcome in the Black communities. These are people that are, in fact, they're celebrated as they are struggle stalwarts. I think them speaking out and would have made a meaningful difference, or a meaningful impact rather, as they actually do have a strong word in the community. But more than that, in regards to the Phoenix matter, I think Phoenix was more of a transit route to more enticing destinations, or home for many. It wasn't a clear target, in my opinion, although Phoenix Plaza may have become one. Whilst this obviously was not clear to them, it thus left them confused, and confusion is not reasonable cause for murder. Overport, on the other hand, was also a transit route and potential destination. People going to loot at Macro, Chesterville, etc., may have gone through Overport. I saw a live footage of helicopter views in the area with traffic through Overport and Sydenham. They didn't bother traffic, but effectively protected their stores. No one got in and no one got hurt. The sentiment I get here is that people are concerned about their children, and the fact that schools open tomorrow and the residents of KwaMashu and the Black Township have kids that go to Phoenix Primary and some of the high schools within Phoenix. People are seriously considering either not letting them go back because of a fear of violence and not necessarily COVID. Others whose children are in Durban North schools may fear discrimination more than violence. Discrimination is a microaggression and may be indirect through marking or marks, passing, failing, and giving attention, or a lack thereof. Children may be discriminated.
Thank you. Would you round it up now, please, Sihle?
Indeed.
We're running on.
Yeah, indeed. The question is, the lack of leadership is the reason why we are here today, and especially of inflammatory statements that have been made. And I think it's up to us as leaders in our own way to make to make justice to be seen to be done. But once again, thank you very much for the invitation, and willing to learn. Thank you.
Thank you, Sihle. That was most useful and a fresh perspective. Moving along, we have Crispin Hemson, an academic and the director of the International Center of Nonviolence. I'm sure the events that played out, Crispin, must have worried you as an activist in the nonviolence realm. And perhaps you want to share with us your perspectives on what transpired and what are possible solutions.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to follow on things Sihle was saying. I want to start with the issue of inequality. And he referred to microaggressions. So this morning I was listening in a lot of detail to somebody who was involved in the looting at both Megacity and in fact at Devonport Center. And I'm having to think about the lives of people like that, because his life is
really a series of invalidations and having to deal with aggressive reactions. And this reality that is simply part of our social fabric makes the entire society very vulnerable. So when you have people whose lives have been systematically devalued, and you then say to them, guys, go for it, you can get goods, they will respond. He spoke to me, he went to a funeral. And one point I want to make is that when people choose to set off violence in this sort of society, we can predict pretty well who will pay the highest price. In our context, it's going to be poor people and African people, and I'm sure that will be revealed in the figures in the end. To get from Lamontville, where he lives, to Mega City, you cross a bridge. It's about 1.8 meters wide. There was a stampede of people to get goods. In the process, people were crushed. It's not in the media. The numbers seem to be between 12 and 15 people, 3 of whom drowned, the rest were crushed. He thought he saw an older friend of his lying there, and he just went on. He said people were bringing back trolleys, and because the bridge is so narrow, they were pushing the trolleys over the dead bodies. So for me, it was like, it was hard to listen to because of the devaluation of human life that this whole process has both involved and revealed. And like Sihle, I think we cannot ignore the role of race in this. Our sense of identity is so caught up with race because it has shaped our life experiences so much, and those of our ancestors. So I think where it has left people, we all have histories that connect with a joint history, but those histories are very partial and our information is very partial. So the Afrikaners had a particular history around the Anglo-Boer War and the concentration camps. And what they did with that trauma was to keep that sense of trauma and injustice alive. And then in the end, they were focusing on that and ignoring the reality of what they were doing in the present when they instituted apartheid. We have the history of trauma of cane cutters working in degrading conditions, often in reality with black supervisors put there by the white owners, and mistreatment. And then white businesses where Indian people were put as supervisors of black people. And these relationships, these racialized relationships have continued. And I think often people are acting, looking at the past and not noticing how focusing on the past can devalue their responses, dehumanize their responses to the present situation. I made some comments about Phoenix and I ran into a lot of flack about it. What got me was that good friends of mine were expressing the heartache they felt about the situation. And that heartache was not being matched by people from Phoenix saying, we are shocked and disturbed by what's happening around us. So my response to, when we talk about what needs to be done, I have very little time for saying, can we get together, tell each other we're non-racial, that we value each other, and that Madiba wouldn't approve of this, because I don't think it takes us anywhere, partly because it's not going to touch where we are trapped. And we are trapped in these experiences and we're acting out of the experiences, and it's very dangerous. We have to have processes where we talk about what those experiences are and where those experiences have left us. And then we can start to see emerging the hope that will be able to move us ahead. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Crispin. Back to you, Sandile. You're on mute.
Thank you so much for that, Baba Hemson. Next on our list is Mrs. Sonto Buthelezi. She's an author and motivational speaker. Sonto?
Good afternoon to everybody, and thank you so much for inviting me to be part of the panel, and greetings to the panelists, fellow panelists as well. Well, my reflections on what has currently or recently happened, a lot of fear to begin with for what we saw unfolding before our eyes. What is going to happen? Why is this happening? What is it going to lead to? And I think most of that fear also resides in what is now expected in the immediate future, or in our future. What is it that's going to happen? There is so much uncertainty right now in terms of financial standpoint of view, and with the possible job losses that seem to be a reality for most people, being affected obviously by the vandalism that has taken place from the looting part of the riots that took place. But more than that, post the riots, post the looting, for an example, the children that have been exposed to families that were part of this looting and participated in the looting, what effects has it had on the children? What effects has it had when mom and child have had to go and participate in the looting? What effects has it had on a child who's had to stand guard in a community with one of the parents or both of the parents and say, we are safeguarding our community? What is the lasting impact on those children that were exposed either to this, we are protecting the community, or either to the looting? And another dimension I want to look at as well is now that the looting has taken place and all these items have been brought in and they are now in our home, and I'm a child within this family, I've been in lack for most of my life. Most of the things that I see now before me, I'm seeing for the first time, other than having had seen them on TV or on a magazine, but now I own them. What's the sense that is evoked in a child? What emotions come to play in a child who says, finally, I get to be like that child I see on TV, or my neighbor's child, or my aunt's child who lives in another community? What things emotionally have been sort of placed as a weight on children? And going forward, in as much as we can maybe look at this from a political, socio-economic, whatever dimension we want to look at, I'm more interested in what redress will take place in families, even for adults for that matter, who have been struggling all their life, and now suddenly they have these things which have been their dream for a long time. And we've also seen, as part of the news that has been broadcast, that in some of these areas, police have come and they've seized these goods. What happens to that child who has had that momentary joy, and now they have to part with this notion of a new self, who now has this experience, who now has this exposure? What happens there? How are we going to deal with that? These families which are already in lack, will they have access to counseling? Will they have access to be assisted from that trauma that they would have experienced? And one of the things also that touched me as we were looking at everything unfolding with the different analysts coming to play One of the psychologists that was called to give comment spoke about collective trauma because of where we come from as a nation. We come from a nation of apartheid. We come from a nation of oppression. We come from a time of so many disparities on a socio-economic level. Now it seems that we've also now brought up one more thing into that bag, which hadn't been dealt with to begin with. Why I feel it hadn't been dealt with on the issue of racial turmoil that broke out as a result, maybe, I don't know, but as one of the factors from all the riots that were happening, the looting, the unrest, there is so much that is beneath the surface. There is so much rot beneath the surface, and it seems that we do not want to have honest dialogue about what is happening. And it is my feeling that unless we are honest enough and brave enough to have discussions where we call a thing, we will not go anywhere. We will not progress. But what will happen is we will dress the wound, and whoever needs to take accountability for any part of what is playing out socially will not get to do that. And it means where we need to say sorry, we will not say it because we don't feel accountable for any wrongdoing. Now, whether I have gone out and looted, I need to be accountable for that. I cannot hide behind a collective and say, Zulu people looted, African people looted, but I have to bring it down to myself and say, I looted. So wherever we avoid accountability, we won't be able to have any form of redress. If I have murdered a person...
Thank you, Sonto. You need to round it up here. We're running out of time. And we get your point on the psychological trauma that exists in South Africa, not only brought on by the looting, but also by the pandemic and heightened levels of anxiety in society. And as you say, this adds just another level to the psychological anguish that we all face as a nation. Thank you for your input, Sonto.
Let me say in rounding up that if we don't want to be accountable for the things that we do as individuals and hide behind collectives and hide behind ethnicity and race, if there's murder that's been committed, people need to be accountable and say, I did this, it's wrong, let me have dialogue. And if we are on polar opposites of a continuum and we don't make attempts to close the gap and have an ear of empathy, because a lot of pain has resulted from the deaths that have occurred post the riots. And if we cannot have empathy for the people that have passed on and the families that have been affected, it won't help us in any way. It won't help us in any way because there won't be healing.
Thank you very much for that, Sonto. It's appreciated. Next up, Sandile.
We have Sandile Mshengu. He is a Chesterville youth activist. Sandile?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, Buti. Just also remain cognizant of the time. We are venturing out of our time. We have a session for comments and further engagement. So we'd like to also get through that.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, we can hear you.
Thanks to all the panelists and thanks for the opportunity to engage. My take on this firstly is that as a nation, when we undergo such trauma, we are all in a way due for cleansing. In spiritual terms, we are deeply for heaven and earth. And so I think I'd like to focus more on the spirit that having led.
Sandile?
Yes, can you hear me?
You are inaudible now.
Can you hear me now?
It's not a good network at all.
Okay, let me try moving around. Can you hear me now?
Let's try that.
Okay. No, I was briefly because of time. As a nation, having gone through such trauma, we are officially unclean, and so I thought perhaps the first thing that we would need to look at is an issue of cleansing, where the Provincial Hearing Commission would, in a way, avail all those who looted and possibly get a provincial sense of what people are going through, because it is beyond what has just happened. But also, I think I would like to recommend that we divert this from an attack, so to speak, because
Sandile, sorry.
Hello?
Sandile? Sorry, let's try this. Yeah, let's try this. Try switching your video off, and let's see how that, whether it makes a difference.
Okay, let me see if I can stop video.
Yes, Sandile, just maybe try that.
Yes, how's it now?
That's a lot better.
It's a lot better. Okay, no, because of time, I just wanted to go through quickly. I was saying that as a nation, we definitely are dirty as a nation, and we needed to undergo some form of cleansing. But also, could do this by not necessarily targeting the Indians per se, but because the thing could then trigger and somehow de-racialize it. So I was proposing that perhaps provincial hearings could be addressed, where individuals could come forward and say basically what are some of their concerns, because it's always good to get the perpetrators themselves and the individual people who are involved in the whole looting and so forth. And so, but I think for me, basically, they so.
Sandile, I think for purposes of continuity,
yes.
we really can't hear you. We're struggling to hear you. What I did get out from that is a suggestion of an inquiry of sorts. Did I hear you correctly or not?
Yes, a commission of sort.
Okay, Sandile, let's try and touch base again later on in our program. Can someone mute? Okay. Sorry about that. The speaker that we have is Sandile Mza. She is an advocate at the Durban Bar. I had briefed her just to speak to us a little about the legislation around hate crime and to talk to us about the bill that's been proposed and has been collecting dust since 2016. Over to you, Sandile.
Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to be part of this important conversation. I think now more than ever, we've heard the words that everyone is equal before the law. And this is actually one of the core constitutional values that the Bill of Rights is based on. And in the same breath, the past events of this month have shown and have led certain groups of people to believe that, in fact, some people may be more equal than others. In the midst of the tragic events that this country faced, we were slapped with the reality, or if we were reminded, in fact, that South Africa is still home to much prejudice and injustices. And part of these disturbing realities is the lack of regulation in terms of people's expression. It's the lack of regulation of the expression and the acts of discrimination, which actually facilitates, it promotes, and it perpetuates further discrimination. And it is exactly what has led us to be here today discussing what we're discussing. If you log into social media right now, you would be shocked at some of the posts and the comments, the confidence of certain people to post discriminatory remarks and posts which discriminate against certain groups of people. And it is exactly these comments and posts that facilitate the events that have come about. People are so confident to make these comments and posts because they have no fear of consequence. And it is the legislation that the government proposed in 2018. If we go back to 2018, the government was cognizant of the concerns around hate speech and hate crimes that was growing in the country. And they proposed a bill which was called the Prevention and Combating of Hate Crimes and Hate Speech. And the bill sought to combat and address the growing hate crimes and hate speech and put in measures to prevent this and combat these offenses. However, to date, this legislation has not been put into effect. If we had this legislation in effect, the growing desire, incitement, and facilitation and promotion of discrimination would not have led to the events, the after effects of the events of this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Sithaniwe. I think also it brings into sharp contrast the fact that why is it that the DA, AfriForum, and Solidarity and the likes of them take people to task over hate speech, whereas the ANC itself could go and lay a charge of hate speech against Julius Malema for his utterances against Pravin Gordhan, which was totally unfounded and inflammatory, but yet they do nothing. But be that as it may, Mam Ela Gandhi, you know, I know you have an umbilical cord with the Gandhi settlement and the Bambai community that surrounds it. And you must be very troubled at what went down in the past fortnight, especially with the unrest and the perceived friction between the two communities whom you grew up in. Can you give us your insights?
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I just want to make two comments. Firstly, to say that soon after the looting started, that's on Monday, soon after it started, the very next day, we went out in the area where I live, over Port and that, to see what's going on in the community. And I must say that I was very, very surprised and happy to see the people across all race groups, gender, religion coming together to protect their neighborhoods. Not only to protect their neighborhoods, but people standing in rows, in queues to buy milk and bread. And shops that was partially open were supplying these items to the community. On the road, we saw long queues of people of all races, and there was no fear. There was no race fear or anything. People were chatting with each other, standing there in these queues. And so the question of race, when did it start? It only started much later, quite a few days later, and it was orchestrated by people who began to raise this issue and then to identify areas like Phoenix and other areas which was totally uncalled for. Because how can you identify one particular area as being culprits of whatever people are accusing the area of? There have been numerous things that have been said, but we don't have the time to go into all those facts and things. But I just want to make the point that there are some people who are trying to use race, just as they use poverty to get people incited to go and loot. They are now using race to get people incited to go and create further mayhem. The only way, historically, what we have seen in the past, for us to counteract that is to be united, to have a strong position in our community, and to be able to counteract that narrative of racial hatred. And I want to suggest that tomorrow when the children go to school, the communities where the schools are located should monitor and see that children are coming in safely and going back home safely. So I would suggest that communities need to come together and do that. And I think the Active Citizens Forum has called on the community to do just that. And I would suggest that other people, religious communities and so on, join them. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that very valuable insights, Ela Ben. I think you have like set us on a new trajectory now. Are we getting too caught up in the race debate when it's actually a criminality debate? And that even, the opportunists amongst the gangsters in these townships have taken this opportunity to further their own ends. And we are now being caught up in a racial debate when in fact it's a criminal debate and one that borders on even gangsterism coming to the fore. But in saying that, I'd like to, if we still have Mongani Wally Serote online, I know he had a problem earlier, and I was hoping that we could go back to him. My brother Mongani, are you there? If you'd unmute, I'm sorry, you've heard everything now, and if you'd like to conclude what you were saying and perhaps round it up for us.
Maybe let me say two things really. The first thing is, in my understanding, we must all of us here agree that we have built non-racialism, non-sexism, democracy, and we intend to be a prosperous nation. That's the first thing that I want to say. The second thing that I want to say is, if we go back a bit in time, we have all listened to the Zondo Commission say this and that, which when you listen to it, it shows up something about corruption. But the key thing about that is underneath that thing of corruption, there's a much more serious thing, which where I have been, we've defined that as counter-revolution, which the president has said, the Thabo Mbeki Foundation has identified it, and many other structures have identified it as counter-revolution. I'm saying this to say, if we do not diagnose the problem correctly, we will not get the right solution to what is facing us. All of us know that when this thing exploded, so-called lootings and everything, when it happens, there seemed to be an orchestration of what needs to happen. I listened to two social media, which was talking about how to attack, what to do. And it was very obvious that this thing is linked to all that process that destroyed the state, that whole thing that went into an unimaginable corruption. which actually was collapsing the state itself. Being an ANC person, also saying that whole thing that created all these deep-seated factions in our organization. Today, what they were doing is seen as if it is the ANC culture. We know the ANC culture. The ANC culture is non-racial, non-racialism, it's non-sexism, it's democracy, and building a country where we do as much as possible to undermine poverty in our society. That is the ANC, those are the ANC values. Anything else outside of that is not ANC. Anything else which is happening within the ANC in this regard, where it generates looting and generates violence and generates ethnicity and all of this, that is not ANC. So those of us who are in the ANC then have that responsibility to say, what do we do to rescue the history, the culture, the values of the African National Congress? What do we do to renew our organization so that it takes its position, its historical position, but it also isolates this counter-revolution so that the people of this country know. Now we know that there is something that we must fight against in order so that we defend non-racialism, we defend non-tribalism, we defend democracy, and we work on the prosperity of our nation. I'm really saying two things here. Let us define the problem correctly, understand that it was orchestrated. It didn't start on its own. Some people sat somewhere and said, we're planning so that we disrupt this nation. So when we know that, then what do we do, those of us who are not part of that? And you don't have to be ANC or anything to take a decision. I know this is a threat to my country, and I'm taking the position. And lastly, that what I should say, Chair, is that please let us not forget, we have a very strong national organs of national, what do you call it, civil society. We saw it pop up now, emerge through community police forums, through organized or spontaneous defense of places. We saw that image. That in itself did not make itself like that. It comes from a history of struggle, a history of this country. That there will be a time when the nation itself takes position. What is it that we do to create, to nurture, to strengthen, and to activate it, as we were saying, as Advocate Zama was saying, Linda Zama was saying. What is it that we should do to take the Constitution and ensure that this Constitution strengthens the resolve of the organs of civil society of our country, because they must own it? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Comrade Mongani. Those are wise words coming from a country elder that we need at these times. And you're right. You know, I was on a forum 2 weeks ago with a group of activists, and we're engaging in counting the losses. But I posed the question that we all knew that this was in the making. When you get the likes of Magashule, Malema, and Zuma meeting in Nkandla, you know there's something afoot. You know they're going to plan something. They know that they're going to discount their queen and send him to prison. And what did we do? As you say, as society, as a country, we must take up, we must make our own stand against this kind of injustice. And I think this crisis has brought us together, as you said, and I think also your view about the Constitution and you know how it was bedded in the Freedom Charter being threatened. I think it's our right as individuals, some of us activists, to protect that. Sandile, do you need to, do you want to ask a question or two?
Yes, Niroj. Perhaps this could be addressed to MEC Ravi Pillay. And the question is, what must be done to close, in your view, the rapidly expanding inequality gap in our society?
I think that's the, thank you, that's the million dollar question, which is complex. But before I get there, let me just thank Comrade Serote for, for really reviving our own belief in those basic values that have driven us, well, throughout our lives. I think it's a very important restatement of basic commitment and basic values. Secondly, I just want to say that to respond generally, because Sihle is reflecting a pain that I have seen widely and have expressed myself on that. Perhaps we have not expressed it enough or loudly enough, or perhaps on enough media platforms, but please rest assured that it's there. But I think the purpose of this kind of engagement is also to identify and criticize ourselves and be accountable and be able to improve of where performance might not have been up to the standard that has been expected. And coming to your question, Zandi, I think that really is the question, the inequality, what Comrade Serote calls the elephant in the room, that we've been happy to, or maybe not happy, but been prepared to tolerate it for so long. And that's going to read a really radical new approach to the economy within the context of the world, because the world economy is a reality. In the ANC, Comrade Serote will explain it as understanding the conditions under which we operate, that we don't be adventurous in our approach. And it comes back to that saying of that former Chinese president, we don't care whether the cat is black and white as long as it catches the mice. And that then requires a very, very intensive interrogation of both the macroeconomic policy, and I think that will happen from what I'm hearing. Even in immediate terms, you get those who will talk about austerity measures versus those who want a more expansionary approach. Those are real debates which we must unpack and be able to understand. But I think whichever we choose, as long as we have a collective unity behind it, then I think it will be succeed. My own personal view is that in this situation of crisis and really disaster, it's really not feasible to talk of austerity measures. We have to respond to the situation, and that might require X, Y, and Z. Whether you want to describe it as austerity or whatever, that's for the academics to define. Secondly, I think it's for those who have to ask, what can they contribute in a bigger way to the sharing, which even the good pastor was explaining about how in the time of crisis, you actually bartered and shared. Now, shouldn't that spirit imbue our overall economic policy about sharing? The third is clearly the long-term economic sustainability depends on an effective education system that produces young people with skills that match the modern economy. In between that, we have to have a plan. I was just yesterday, we were dealing with the issue of the clothing and textile industry, and people were talking about how mechanization is destroying jobs. And if you wanted to have a profitable business, you will go into mechanization. But can we really allow just the profit motive to drive that work arrangement? Or is it mass employment that must drive our strategic objective? And lastly, there are specific programs which our government has and the provincial government has that talks to radical economic transformation. And again, there, I think we need to put it under the microscope for public scrutiny, refuse to allow that to be vulgarized, as I put it earlier on, from whichever extreme that vulgarization comes. But in that lies a key part of the solution, a dedicated, concerted, directed economic program to those whom we want to lift out of poverty and into higher levels of economic activity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, MEC Pillay. Just a question, a last question that I'd like to address to the Bishop, where he had spoken about an uncritical optimism of sorts. If you could just expand on that for us.
I think I meant by that, that I think it's a human temptation to want to gloss over pain and suffering. We don't naturally want to face the fact of pain. So we tend to say and do things that makes the situation more palatable, more acceptable. We downplay some of the sharpness of what a situation can raise. So my plea is that there can be no progress, no real progress, unless and until we face the problem, not sugarcoat it, but to really face it, name it for what it is, and then we're able to apply the appropriate solution. I guess it's like a medical doctor who has to do a careful examination and discern what the problem is before she or he can apply the appropriate remedy. And I've, in my conversations with a number of people over what happened in Phoenix, I hesitate to call it a massacre. It seems to me that people, for whatever reason, largely to save their own skin, tend to downplay the severity of what had happened in Phoenix. We kind of use language and words and ideas that wants to take away the sharpness of that situation. So we really need to be careful about that.
And just to follow up from that, we need to really confront what it is that we have, and a denialism of be it racism or criminality is not self-serving to the purpose that we want to achieve. So in my particular instance, I've seen, and I think we need to tackle the anti-Indian sentiment that has also been thrown out and spewed into the air. And coupled with that, if there was racism in those incidences in Phoenix and around the Durban and the surrounding areas, that needs to be tackled as well. And we should not hesitate to call what it is exactly what it is. I say that the second worst thing to racism is the denial of racism itself. So I'm in agreement with you and on that, Bishop. And that, I think, would conclude my facilitation of this process. Over to you, Nirod.
Thank you very much for that, Sandile. I think we've covered a lot of ground today in our discourse, and I'd like to echo some of the comments. I think, Spo, you made a very interesting comment that we have been set against each other by our leadership, and hence that lack of leadership. This also came out with the Abashlali Basemamjodo, who said the same thing, that leadership is lacking, or if they're not lacking, they're setting us against each other. And we should guard against that, because what Ela Gandhi raised is that it is actual criminality and then taking on for spurious reasons and for expeditiousness the race card. And I think we should be all too aware that we are being played here, not only race, but also ethnicity, where you get, I remember reading this morning, the Abislali comment on how an Isikosa person or a Mampondo person is being vilified in those areas, leave alone a foreigner. So I think we need to be guarded against that. And I think we need to have ongoing discussions to guard this democracy, as Comrade Mongani has said, that we need to engage with each other and we need to defend what we fought for, and that was non-racialism. And we must be non-compromising in that battle to fight for that non-racialism and to protect that constitution, which cost many lives and many years in the making. So in saying those few words, I think Salvin would organize ongoing discussions and to exchange more views and to share this on our social media platforms so that the message goes out that, there's lots of discussion and thought around this, and that we have considered all the elements that have come to play, and we are resolute in our bid to build that non-racial society. And we are uncompromising on that score. So in doing so, I'd like to say thank you for everybody for making the time. I know we ran on a bit, and I appreciate all of you for making the time and making this a very valuable and useful engagement for the 1860 Heritage Center. I thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank
inviting.
you very much, Nirod and Philip.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We are off live, so if you want to continue to engage, that's fine. But if you happen to want to leave, that's also fine. Thank you again, everyone. We really appreciate your participation